Hello, this is Hal, and I'm speaking with fellow Vedanta student Bede. Bede is also a psychotherapist. And this is the eighth in a series of videos, conversations that we've been having on what Bede calls Vedanta Psychology, or the psychology of Swami Dayananda. How are you today, Bede?
I'm good, thank you, Hal. How are you going?
Good, very well, thank you.
Okay, I thought what we were talking about last time, we were talking about that the presence of reality is in the form of a functioning order, and this functioning order is in totally and completely and perfectly in conformity with the intelligent arrangement that this universe of appearances is. That's what we were talking about. And what I wanted to briefly, and we ended the last conversation with, we were talking about that this reality as the intelligent cause. In other words, the determining factor that determines the intelligent arrangement of the universe itself and the entire functioning of this universe in conformity with this intelligent arrangement. So we were talking about that last time, and I mentioned to you that we were going to go further on and we're going to look at the presence of reality, which is in the form of you, me, trees, cars, houses, as the material cause. And I told you that the importance of understanding and appreciating this had a great deal to do with the resolution, relatively speaking, of our sense of isolation from the whole.
Okay, so we're talking about really just in a larger sense how we relate to reality, and how the way that we relate to reality determines really whether we're in conflict with it or not. In a more general sense, that's really what we're talking about here.
Yes, and it's an interesting point you bring up. You see, before Vedanta, the tendency is that we see reality as the appearances themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so we see that reality is cars, is trees, is the actual particular form that it's taking. And this is, you know how when we talk about in Vedanta, we talk about knowledge. What we mean practically is coming alive to a fact that's always been here, but we haven't necessarily appreciated it.
Uh-huh.
Now, the very interesting thing here is that when we're talking about the reality, this understanding that we're talking about is not going to come from the world of appearances. Coming alive to the fact of reality is an event that happens in our understanding. And the thing that's important to see here is that when I first come across Vedanta, is that what happens is you get in front of a traditional teacher who's competent, and what you do is you listen. And the importance of this is that when you listen repeatedly, because it's not just simply just a one-off thing, I have an epiphany and whoopsie, let's go. What happens is we become alive to facts. And so what happens is that a teacher unfolds the vision of reality. Now, this is not the same as when you read a book and you gather in your mind concepts about what reality is. This is actually the teacher, through their words become a mirror in which what happens is that you come alive to an understanding or a fact that you weren't aware of before. So when we talk about reality, we're talking about something that is unfolded, a scriptural vision, basically, that we become alive to. And once we're alive to this reality that's been unfolded to us, we can then abide in the appreciation of that reality. And the importance of this abiding in the appreciation is that when we are actually abiding in the appreciation of this reality, we are transformed as individuals.
Right. Okay. So what you're saying is it's not really just we're not just talking about a conceptual framework or a philosophical system or a metaphysical system or even a religious point of view. What we're talking about is really the unfolding of a vision that is actually directly experienceable in a sense. In other words, that one can actually, through understanding, one actually sees what one is experiencing in this way, right?
Yes, we can appreciate the fact that's unfolded. It's like when I open my eyes and I see a tree in front of me, I become alive to the color and form, don't I?
Mm-hmm.
Because there's a means of knowledge. So the same way when you listen to a traditional Vedanta teacher who's competent, what happens is that you become alive in your understanding to a fact in the same way.
Mm-hmm.
And the importance with what you come alive to in Vedanta is that the facts that are unfolded in Vedanta are very special in this regard, that when we become alive to them, it changes us as an individual.
Right. It's not just something theoretical.
It's not even slightly theoretical. You see, what happens is, even though the tradition uses words,
Mm-hmm.
right? It has to use words. It uses words in a very special way. You know, if I look at a mirror, if I'm looking at the mirror itself, then I'm looking at the mirror. I'm not seeing my reflection in the mirror, am I?
No.
But when the mirror is just simply a reflecting medium in which I can see myself,
Mm-hmm.
that's different, isn't it? There's two different. One is the mirror as an object. The other is I'm an object. I'm looking at myself through the object, and the mirror is a reflecting medium. So when you look at words, normally when we say read a book, no one can understand Vedanta through reading a book. They may think they understand Vedanta through reading a book, but what they'll do is they will automatically read the words, they'll form associations in their mind, and they'll say, oh, I've got it.
Right.
Whereas in the context of Vedanta, when you're actually listening to a traditional teacher, your mind is quiet, you're listening, and in that very listening, you become alive to facts. And in this fact that we're talking about now is that when I first met my teacher, Atma Prakashananda, she unfolded to me the vision of reality.
Mm-hmm.
Appearing in as trees, as cars, as all of this type of thing. And it took a while for me to come alive to the fact in the first place and begin to appreciate it.
Okay, I see.
All right. Now what we were talking about is that, so so appearances actually can have now a different meaning to us.
Mm-hmm.
Because what we're looking at is we're looking at the presence of reality, which is appearing as these different forms. And the way they explain this is they have a famous kind of like it's a learning instrument that enables us to understand what they're talking about. It discusses a thing called a clay pot. And I'd just like to talk about that for a minute.
Okay.
Now, when you look at a clay pot, what you've got is you've got clay in the form of a pot, haven't you?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Now, in Western thinking, we use the substance, the clay, as the adjective. So we say the primary thing is the form. We go, it's a pot.
Right.
And it's a clay pot in order to describe the kind of pot it is.
Yes.
And because we actually take, and it's quite normal and natural before Vedanta, to take the form as the reality itself, the form per se, And then we say that the substance is the adjective. We say it's a clay pot.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right? Now,
Right.
this gets interesting because, you see, as Swami Dayananda says, in actual fact, it's actually potty clay.
It's actually what?
Potty clay.
Okay.
So what he means is that now the interesting thing here is when we look at a clay pot, are there two separate entities? Is there a thing called a pot and a thing called clay?
No, it's just one thing.
Okay, so it's one reality
Mm-hmm.
in a particular form.
Right. Right.
Okay, now is the clay pot on the clay?
Is the pot on the clay? Is that
Yes.
the question
Yes.
you're asking? No.
Okay, what about,
The pot is on the clay.
okay, is it inside the clay?
No, it's not inside the clay.
Right.
No, none of those words apply.
Now, yeah, is the clay inside the pot? Not really, is it?
Some people could make it, some people could think that way, but if you really look at it more carefully, no, you wouldn't say the clay is really inside the pot. No. Unless you had a pot filled with clay.
Yes,
But that's a different matter. If you're just talking about a clay pot, you wouldn't say the clay is inside the pot. No. The clay is the pot.
Very good. The clay is the pot. Now,
right.
Now it gets.
The pot is the clay.
Yes, the pot is the clay. Now, the weight of the pot is the weight of the clay.
Pardon me?
The weight of the pot is the weight of the clay.
Right. If you make clay into a pot, it still weighs the same.
Yes.
It's just the same lump of clay that was used to make.
Yes.
The pot.
So what we have is we have this substance called clay in the form of a pot.
Right.
Okay.
The potness doesn't add anything in terms of weight or substance to clay, right?
It's in fact not another being.
No. It's just the form that this clay is taking.
Yes.
Right.
Now, there's a very, very interesting point here. The very presence of the pot is the presence of the clay.
Right, right.
So when I'm looking at this pot, I'm looking at clay in the form of a pot.
Yes.
Okay, it's like in one sense a wider vision, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. You could look at it that way, yeah.
Instead of being narrowed down on the name and the form, pot and the form,
yeah,
we're including we're looking at the reality of clay in the form of a pot.
I see. What you're saying by it being a wider vision is because you're not just focused on the form, but you're actually including what the substance itself is.
Yes, because you understand that the form is entirely dependent upon the clay for its existence as a form.
Exactly. So in a sense, you're saying you're really acknowledging that the reality of the pot, in a sense, is the clay.
Is the clay.
Yes.
Okay, it's a beautiful way to explain it. Now they have a word here that's very, very important. Have you ever heard of the saying in Western Judaic thinking that God is everywhere or reality is everywhere?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But you see, everywhere means in space, so we don't use that word. We say that the clay is all pervasive.
It's all pervasive. Mm-hmm.
Yes. So in every part of that pot, the clay pervades.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. So there's nothing about that pot that is not clay.
Right.
Okay? Now, this is just a learning instrument just to give us an understanding of something, because what happens is what the scriptural vision of reality is this entire universe is the presence of reality, which is not an appearance, which is not a form, right? So the presence of reality is not a form, right? But it's the presence of reality in the form of this entire universe and all the workings and happenings within it.
Okay. And by reality, you're meaning, in a certain sense, the substance. What the substantive is, that is the actual content, so to speak, or substance of all the forms that you're experiencing.
Quite. So that what happens is that because when you look at what everything is, it's appearances.
Right.
So I'm looking at you. You're an appearance. Do you mean I can feel the sensations in my body? They're appearances. All experience is ever-changing appearances unfolding in a certain manner.
Right. Just in the same way as we were talking about the pot and the clay, that the pot is just the appearance, the form that the clay is taking.
Yes.
You may be, when you're experiencing the pot, seeing the pot, you're actually experiencing the clay.
The clay.
That is what essentially, fundamentally, in a certain way, made out of.
Yes.
In a similar sense, you say that whatever one's experiencing or seeing in front of you, a person, a tree, house, that really, that's the form that reality is taking.
Yes. It's the presence of reality. It's the everything that we're looking at is the presence of reality.
Right.
And the most important thing about it, so we're talking about a reality which is not an appearance, but everything that we're looking at is the presence of that reality in a particular form. Now, this is not cosmology or philosophy or religion, right? What's important, what Swami Dayananda says is that we have to learn that we have the possibility of being able to appreciate this reality as a fact. And why it's so important to do so is that when we're abiding in the appreciation of this reality as this reality, we change as individuals.
Okay. Well, and why is that? How is that?
Okay. Now, when you know how we were discussing it's a very interesting thing. So, what happens is that when you look around, what this is saying is that the presence of the given is the presence of the giver. Okay, so that when you're looking at a tree, that's given, isn't it?
Yes.
But the thing is that tree is a manifestation of the presence of reality, which in reality it's born of reality, it's sustained by reality and goes back to reality. All right. Now the important thing here is this, is that we can practically know that what happens is that in Vedanta we talk about receiving the given, don't we? Now it's a very interesting thing that if you just look at any object and you simply become aware of it and you appreciate it in the light of this understanding that this very object that we're looking at is the presence of reality, the moment you simply receive that object into your awareness, you become aware of your own presence. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? To be aware of the presence of reality in the form of a tree isn't also the same as to become aware of the presence of ourselves simultaneously. Is that an interesting fact or what?
Well, because I think, though, to really understand this, you have to have a sense, really, though, what is this? What do you mean by, though, this reality, the presence of reality, exactly? Another analogy that we were talking about is the clay in the pot.
Mm-hmm.
But, most people, when they would say they're experiencing a tree, a person, a house,
mm-hmm.
their sense, at first blush anyway, might just be that they're just experiencing many different things. What is the commonality in all those experiences that you would say is like the clay or the pot?
It's covered by the word is.
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 This is what the common denominator, so to speak, of all these different experiences of different forms that we're having, is that they all are.
They all are. And that are, or that is available, as my teacher says, for understanding and appreciation as my very self.
Right, because I think the thing is that when you see that it's this isness, or existence, or beingness,
Yes.
This beingness that you experience as the given of whatever you're experiencing is the same beingness as you experience in yourself. Or
As yourself, yes. As yourself.
Exactly. So when you say, I think one of my teachers would say, it's like, and I think Swami Dayananda would talk this way, you go, the tree is, the car is, the friend is, I is.
Yes.
Grammatically, we say I am, but it's really, we're referring to the same being quality, isness quality, whether we're talking about our experience of ourselves or our experience of what we call the, quote, external, so-called external world.
Yes,
and same, right?
Yes, and I wanted to say something here. We couldn't be having this conversation now without the help of the scripture. So when we talk about the inquiry of Vedanta, we're not just simply sitting quietly and waiting for something to come. We're examining our life in the light of the scriptural unfoldment of what the vision of reality is.
Right.
Because we become alive. See, knowledge is an event. We come alive to the fact of this reality within our understanding. And
well, it's in the sense that basically we're experiencing this already, but it's you say the scriptures,
yes,
that is illuminating that for us, that is pointing that out to us, that's in a certain way acting like a mirror for our experience.
Quite. What happens?
Otherwise, we would really not notice it. The reason being is because really what we're talking about here, when we're talking about something like the experience or the vision of being itself as
yes.
being the substantive of everything that we experience,
yes,
that is something that is always there, so that without the scripture, without the teaching pointing it out to us,
yes.
we would just never notice that on our own. So
this is a very good point, because you see what Vedanta does is that it transforms the meaning of what we're looking at. You see, normally we have a personal, what life means to us, what we mean, what other people mean, what trees and cars mean to us, is the basis of that is experience and what's happened to us and all of this type of thing. And you see, so what happens is that life has a certain meaning to us. Now, what Vedanta does is it unfolds entirely a vision which transforms what things mean, the meaning of what we're looking at. But the important thing here is that, you see, for us as human beings, because we've been living in our little world, in our own little world, what Dayananda calls our world, you're living in your world, my world, I'm full of me. He said that what we need to do is live in Ishvara's world. And this shift, this cognitive shift from living in our world to Ishvara's world is absolutely important, because as we've said before, when the presence of reality is invited in our life and it comes in and takes up all the room, we as a suffering person disappear. And we're not talking about some sort of inward mystical state. We're talking about the fact that when we come into relationship to the presence of reality, whether that's a tree, an emotion, a person, when we come into relation factually with the presence of what is there, that presence comes in and takes up all the room, then we change psychologically, because the subjectivity is erased, disappeared, if you like.
Okay.
Now, but the important point here, and this is the thing, is that when we begin to appreciate reality in the light of what is being unfolded in the Vedantic vision, is that what is born out of this reality is an attitude. And this transformation of attitude is what frees us from the burden of our psychological past, and that's what I'd like to talk about.
Okay.
Okay. Now, you know, when you look at what an attitude is that most schools of Western psychology would agree that by the time we're 6 years old, we have a fairly stable attitude concerning ourselves, an attitude concerning other people, and an attitude concerning what the world is like.
Mm-hmm.
And this is based on our experience of what has happened to us.
Right.
Now, Swami Dayananda's got a very interesting thing he talks about that an attitude is the individual. Now, what he means by that is that this way of seeing that myself, for example, is a way of seeing, isn't it?
Yes.
Now, out of that, as that way of seeing becomes embodied as a way of thinking, a way of feeling, certain physiological reactions, and an urge to behave.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, and this attitude, there's a tremendous pressure for our actions to conform to this attitude.
Right.
So if I'm seeing you as an idiot, there will be a pressure for me to it will feel natural. It'll naturally conform. Do you know what I mean?
You'll act in that way.
Yes. Our actions conform to our attitude. But the important point is that the attitudes that are formed in us when we're small are deterministic, aren't they? And so when these attitudes become active in us today, they're kind of like a rerun, aren't they?
Mm-hmm. So you're saying this is all basically set pretty much by the time we're 6 years old.
That's right. And Swami Dayananda says that emotionally we're children. We're about 6. Okay? So what happens is that, and when these attitudes these attitudes towards ourselves, other people in the world, tend to remain quite stable. We keep on repeating the same types of things in our life. We have the same kind of upsets. Have you noticed that? We have the same upsets. We have the same types of interactions. We have the same types of conclusions about what people are like, what we're like, what the world's like. Have you noticed that?
Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And we, of course, assume it's all true. There's a tremendous feeling of rightness about our viewpoints.
Right. And even if we, let's say, move to the other side of the world, the problem is we bring ourselves with us. So in the end, nothing really seems to change in terms of our experience of life.
Right. So
Not much, anyway.
No, because we're actually our life is a dramatization which is an embodiment of that way of seeing, these fixed ways of seeing what I'm like, what other people are like, and what the world is like.
Yeah, and we tend to recreate the same situations for ourselves, lo and behold, somehow, no matter where we go.
That's true. It has been
Have you noticed that? Have you noticed that?
I've got a PhD in that type of thing, Hal. So this is the tremendous problem in terms of when we say, well, what does it mean to transform an individual? See, what Swami Dayananda says is that we have become our psychology. We become our thinking.
Right.
Now, my teacher, Atma Prakashananda, makes a beautiful distinction. There's personality, the person, reality.
Mm.
Now, what happens is that when I have become the personality, which Swami Dayananda calls, it's all of the inbuilt reactions that are built into us that keep on coming alive, keep on coming alive in reactions to events. Do you know what I mean? Oh, I hate that. I can't stand that. I like it. Whatever it is, that it just keeps on coming alive.
Right.
What's the most important thing is my becoming aware of myself as a conscious person.
Hmm.
And this is what he calls being alive to facts. You see, unless I'm alive, we've talked about this before. If I'm going, oh God, life sucks. You know what I mean? Now, in myself, I'm having an experience, aren't I?
Yeah.
But am I being alive to facts, or has the notion life sucks become embodied as an experience that I'm facing as if it's external?
Right. We're exactly. We're projecting that on our experience of life rather than actually experiencing life as it actually is.
But if I'm seeing it like that, can you see how I'm going to embody that way of seeing? I'm going to dramatize it. I'm going to live it out, aren't I?
Yeah.
Right? Now, it's a very interesting thing. We've talked about in the last is that when we become alive to a fact, in other words, the presence of what is, this is very important. We become alive and appreciate the presence of what is.
Mm-hmm.
We become conscious as a person. So unless we become in contact with the presence of what is, we are not conscious.
I see. You mean we're just sort of replaying our old scripts over and over again.
Compulsively.
In a kind of mechanical sort of way.
Yes.
So this is a possibility of actually becoming conscious of what is, being alive to the presence of reality, of being self, so forth and so forth. That gives us the possibility of actually not being completely bound by our repetitive scripts. Right?
Quite. That's the whole point. Because you see, what's very interesting is this. Me as a simple conscious presence, or me as a simple conscious being, or me as the cognitive person, or me as the basic person, Swami Dayananda uses all those terms. Mm-hmm. Me as that is not being produced by my relationship between my parents and myself, or the historical setting that I've been brought up in, or the economic setting that I've been brought up in. That in itself is where the starting point of freedom. We talk about freedom, but this is the place, the location of where freedom begins.
I see. Okay. So because you're getting down now to the point, to the level of essentially the clay.
Yes.
Which is not limited by the particular form of the pot that it happens to be taking.
We haven't quite got to the clay yet, because what happens is that I'm aware of you. Do you know what I mean? So I'm aware of the presence of you, and at the same time I'm aware of the presence of myself when I'm aware of the presence of you. Do you know what I mean? Now, the total vision of Vedanta is that the very presence of you and the presence of me is one and the same. That is true, and that ultimately. The whole vision of Vedanta is to bring us to the place, the point where we can appreciate the fact that the presence of the whole and our presence is one and the same. And they have a word for that, and they call it moksha. And this is the whole reason, ultimately, why we study Vedanta. Is to
also another word for that is, you could say, non-duality.
Quite.
Right?
Yep, there is only clay.
Right, exactly.
There is only reality, and that reality I am.
Right.
That's the ultimate vision. Now, but for us to begin to appreciate that fact, what Swami Dayananda says is that the first task is the reduction of subjectivity.
Okay.
And he says we're all caught in this. That one of the problems with subjectivity is it appears extremely objective in our eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what happens is that, you know, the feeling of, first of all, there's two fundamental things with us as human beings, isn't there? Resistance and isolation. Okay, they're two fundamental things. And so what happens is that when we appreciate that the reality is functioning perfectly in accordance with the order, so that whatever I'm looking at is the presence of reality or the presence of God in the form of this functioning order, right? What this does is it relieves me from my resistance to facts.
Okay.
And what that means is that what Swami Dayananda says is that the basis of reaction is resistance to facts.
Okay.
So if this resistance is not there,
yeah,
I'm not full of reaction, hence I am conscious.
Okay.
But normally, in actual fact, you know, even when we're daydreaming, we're resisting the fact of the present moment, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Resistance is quite common. Now, the other thing
even though resistance is futile, as somebody said.
Yes. Facts are just facts. Yeah.
Exactly. This is really where we're getting into we're talking in a kind of psychological way of what traditionally is spoken of as karma yoga.
Yeah, precisely. Precisely. Because you see, what happens is that what happens is that Swami Dayananda says that when you become alive and appreciate the presence of God or the presence of reality in the form of order, when you're actually appreciating that you appreciate that what I am looking at now is not my crazy spouse, but I am looking at the functioning or the psychological order, the perfect functioning of the psychological order. When I'm actually seeing it like that, I am not full of reaction.
Right. So then your likes and dislikes diminish, or your strong reactions based on likes and dislikes diminish.
Yes, because you see, what happens is that what he says that out of this understanding, you see, what's the important part for the human being to understand this vision of reality is that what's born out of that reality is an attitude which he calls graceful acceptance.
Okay.
Now, graceful acceptance, you ever seen a boat gliding through the ocean?
Yeah.
It's graceful, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
There's no friction in it, is there?
No.
So when I am being gracefully accepting, right, it means that I can actually receive. I become a receiver, don't I?
Yes.
Not a resistor. So I, as an individual, become a receiver. But what's interesting is that this attitude is not born out of my psychological past, is it?
No, I see. What do you mean by that exactly? So.
It's not a modification of my past psychology or my past attitudes that have been formed in me from my past experiences. It's born in me as the result of a vision becoming alive in me.
I see. Okay.
Listening to a teacher.
And seeing actually that the presence of the given is the presence of the giver, that what you're actually experiencing in life is a reflection or manifestation of the order of things, right?
Yes, yes.
And so it is what it is because that goes along with the order of reality. So there's no use in resisting, nor is there any reason to resist, because what's happening is actually the manifestation of reality itself.
And it's perfectly in order. It can't be any other way.
It couldn't be any other way, right? It's perfectly in order, right?
Yeah. Now, but what emotionally has a tremendous impact is that that's looking at reality as the intelligent cause of the universe, right?
Uh-huh.
But when we look at the material cause, so reality is the material cause of the universe. You know how a shirt is made of material. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
A clay pot is made of material, clay, right?
Right.
What this does is that this removes our isolation, because when I was younger, I used to think, well, about truth and God and reality, and it was all very kind of nice, but the thing is, I was still a lonely, isolated individual. Does that make sense? Now,
yes.
What's really interesting here is that right here, right now, as I am, I can become aware of the presence of the given, can't I?
Mm-hmm.
Do I have to go anywhere to do that, Hal?
No. It can only happen here and now. Right?
Yeah. And do I have to struggle? Is the presence of reality something I have to do?
No. It's something to understand that comes from not resisting, really.
And can I get to it?
Can you get to it? No, because there's no distance between you and it.
Exactly. Now, this is the most interesting thing, is that when we abide in this vision that the very presence of the given is the presence of the giver, or the very presence of what I'm facing right now is the presence of reality or the presence of God, what happens is that presence takes up all the room,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm lifted out of my subjectivity.
Mm.
And when I'm lifted out of my subjectivity, what happens to me as a suffering individual?
Well, the suffering individual isn't really there anymore.
Quite. Now, this is the most magnificent point of Swami Dayananda's psychology. That this is the essential issue, is that myself as an unhappy person, which is often a very convincing experience,
Mm-hmm.
doesn't matter what I do inside myself. I can try this therapy, I can try this approach, I can do relaxation, I can do all of these things.
Mm-hmm.
But when I come into relationship to the presence of reality through the understanding of this vision of God or reality that Swami Dayananda unfolds,
Mm-hmm.
I find myself being myself, being aware, and being full.
Right. So let me go back for a minute, because I think if I could try to reiterate a point that you made just a little while ago, because I thought it was very interesting. We've spoken in the past quite a bit about seeing that whatever we are experiencing, or the presence of the given, is the presence of the giver, in the sense that whatever we're experiencing reflects the order of reality. It has to be the way it is.
Yes.
It is occurring based upon an intelligent order to things. Now this, you said, really is relating to the giver as the intelligent cause
Yes.
of life or of the universe, of our experience. Now, today, you move things forward a bit further by talking about what you're calling the material cause, and that is actually seeing that the presence of the given is the presence of the giver in the sense of reality itself, or being the substance of being itself, so to speak.
Quite.
Just as the substance of the pot is clay, we actually can see that the substance of our experience, the substance of whatever it is that we're experiencing, is this beingness itself, which is the same beingness or presence or isness of whatever we're seeing as a sort of object and whatever we experience as ourselves, right?
Yes.
Okay, so basically what happens is, through understanding that the presence of the given is the presence of the giver in the form of in the sense of the intelligent cause, or the order of things,
Yes.
that eliminates our resistance to
Yes.
our experience. And experiencing that the presence of the given is the presence of the giver in the sense of the material cause, or the beingness itself, that eliminates our sense of isolation.
Yes.
So by seeing both of these aspects, understanding both of these aspects and actually seeing them as the living reality, we've eliminated resistance and isolation or loneliness, basically.
Yes.
Right? Okay.
Yes. Now this is
very good. Okay, so I just wanted to make
yes.
sure that I followed
No.
you there.
Very important, because you see, Swami Dayananda says that Ishvara is the best therapist.
Okay.
Now,
those are really the main problems that we're encountering is, excuse me, our resistance to things as they are.
Yep.
And our sense of loneliness or isolation.
Right?
Yes. Alienation, so to speak.
Yes.
Loneliness.
Now, this is the importance of this vision of reality. Now, the importance is this, is first of all, we become alive to it. And I first of all came alive to it because my teacher, my Prakashananda, kept hammering it. Now, I didn't want to know about it, actually. I wanted awareness in the self and all of that stuff. I didn't want this at all. More for me. But the thing is that, so what happens is that we first of all become alive to it. But what's important is we learn to abide in this. We have to learn to abide in this vision, this way of seeing, this appreciation of reality as a way of life.
Okay.
Otherwise, it's of no value.
Right.
And this, so when we're talking about, and we're going to be doing, in our next conversations, we're going to be going into this big time. But the essential thing is this. First of all, is that there are two aspects of living, isn't there? First of all, we have to receive what is happening. Is that right?
Yeah.
So we've got to shift from being a resistor and a reactor to being a receiver.
Okay.
A graceful receiver. And we know, and the great thing about graceful acceptance is that once we become familiar with this attitude, which is born out of this appreciation of God, we can actually relax. We find ourselves being relaxed. It's not like we're trying to make ourselves relaxed or anything like that. We just find ourselves being content within ourselves. Does that make sense? And because what Swami Dayananda says, that in order to be able to understand the total vision that the presence of reality and the presence of myself are one and the same, he says what has to happen in us is we have to develop what we call a contemplative disposition. In other words, our mind has to be actually moving in the direction, inclined to simply being myself as myself.
Mm-hmm.
But when we're caught up of wanting this, and we want to move away from ourselves, in fact. We find ourselves boring. It's not that,
Right.
That's of no interest. That's not going to get me what I want. So we're caught up. So the thing is that the first practical shift is that because out of this vision of reality, for this reality to come into our life, we have to become alive to it. To become alive, we have to become alive to it.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
If we don't become alive to it, it is not in our life. It doesn't matter what books we read. It doesn't matter what we think philosophically, religiously. If we do not become alive to it, it does not come into our life. First thing.
Mm-hmm.
It is not useful to us unless we can abide in it.
Right.
Abide in this appreciation of it right now, right here as I am. There is no other time. The starting point of Vedanta is right now, right here as I am. Also, the end point is right here, right now as I am. There is no other place.
Okay.
Now, so we first of all have to be a receiver, right? Now, we're not going to receive unless we can understand the order. Do you see what I mean? And unless we actually see what is happening in front of us in the right way, in the right light.
Right.
So it's a radically different thing, isn't it? That when you see other people or yourselves acting in certain ways that you find disapproving, but if you're actually seeing what you're seeing is this functioning order, you're released from friction, aren't you, and resistance.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, and also you're released from the fundamental unhappiness when you invite the presence of reality in and you're lifted out of your subjectivity. What happens is this fundamental angst that we've been talking about is neutralized, isn't it?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And because that unhappiness, because the binding desires that what I really want, what I want this, I desperately want it. The desperation is born out of that unhappiness centered on myself, isn't it?
Right.
So that's what neutralizes the desires. Okay. Because you can't neutralize desires unless you find something better.
Right.
It's just not possible. It's not possible. So first of all, we become a receiver. Now, the second part is this. When we are living creatures, aren't we? We live. As an individual, I'm living in the world, aren't I?
Yeah.
And because I'm living in the world, right, I have to respond to things, don't I?
Sure.
So what karma yoga is, or the lifestyle, is first of all, we shift from being a resistor and a reactor to being a graceful receiver, which is the attitude. This willingness to gracefully receive what is happening is born out of this understanding of reality, first of all.
Right.
And also, instead of being a reactor, we become a responder.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Now, what Swami Dayananda says is this, is that here we have this habit, haven't we? We've been living out our attitudes and our psychology. We've been habitually all our lives.
Yes.
So there has to be you can't simply say, well, whoop-de-doo-de-dum, I now appreciate reality. I have to be able to, in order for me to be able to come into harmony with this reality, there is a certain lifestyle that must go along with it. And if I don't live this lifestyle or this way of life, I disconnect myself from the reality. And so in terms of my responsiveness, there's three things. I first of all have to be non-harmful. I have to bring value or beneficial contribution.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to be appropriate.
Hmm.
Because if I don't, because you see what one of the fundamental things is, and which we're going to be going into later on, is that inside me I have an understanding of what is right and what is wrong. Now this understanding is built into me as an individual. And if I, so when remember we were talking about the hourglass, one moment comes to us one moment at a time.
Yeah.
So I deal with this moment. First of all, I don't harm. Secondly, if I can, I bring a value. I contribute. What Diananda calls reaching out actions. I contribute to what's in front of me, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in an appropriate way.
Okay.
Now, Swami Dayananda, which is what we're going to talk about sort of next time, he gives a very interesting thing about the transformation of the individual. He says, you may not feel kind or loving. That's fine. We're not in charge of our reactions, are we? But he says, but you can do a loving and kind act.
Okay. You might not feel kind and loving, but you can do a kind and loving act.
Yes.
We're not in control of our feelings, but we can control what we do.
Yes.
Right? Okay.
Now, but he says a very interesting thing, and he spent a lot of time talking about this in the last year of his life when I was there. He says that when you do a kind act, because you understand the value of living in the right way, and you want to maintain this relationship to reality.
Yes.
He said that kind act will evoke the kind person. You see, and it's so important because when we act from our psychological past, we're just reinforcing it, aren't we?
Right.
We're actually energizing it.
Yeah.
But when we live this life, what's happening is that we're actually creating a distance between ourselves and the burden of this psychology.
Yeah.
And so what happens is that what's going to measure our acts is not how I feel, but what is actually in front of me, which is the presence of reality.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to respond to that in the best possible way. And that's the basis of my responsiveness.
Right. Okay. So what you're talking about is that there should be a kind of a way of living that supports this vision that we've been describing, right? It both supports it and it reflects it. Right?
It enables us to abide in it as a way of life.
Okay.
Because what my teacher first told me is that because this sense of right and wrong, the ethical strivings in the human being.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we know what's right and wrong.
Yeah.
He said that if you violate this, if you do not do what you know to be the right thing, she says, first of all, you come into friction with yourself and you come into friction with the environment.
Right.
Now, if I'm in friction with myself or friction with the environment, how am I going to be in terms of this contemplative disposition, which I need if I'm to appreciate myself, as simply myself as being, myself as awareness, and myself as fullness. How is it?
Right. So what are the three again? The three guidelines?
Which one? Non-harmfulness.
Yes.
First of all, don't do harm. We're going to go more into this. The second one is beneficial contribution.
Be a contributor.
Being a contributor. If you, for example, let's say your wife is upset, you can say, well, stuff her, I'm going to go away, I'm going to go and have a cup of coffee or watch TV. Or you could possibly come up with something that would be helpful. Does that make sense?
Sure.
So these choices are with us all the time. And appropriateness.
And what does that mean, appropriateness?
It means it fits with the situation. You wouldn't tell a joke at a funeral.
Oh, okay.
It means, you know, like you don't disturb people.
I see.
So, but what happens is that our responsiveness is based on what is happening.
Right.
But bear in mind that this whole lifestyle is to bring ourselves back to ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So that there is an inclination or a disposition, so we discover what we call a contemplative disposition, which is a leaning towards coming back to ourselves.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. That's good.
Yes. And so just to sum up, so what we're saying is that for a human being to undergo a transformation as an individual, they have to become alive to the fact of what the presence of reality is.
Mm-hmm.
This frees them from conflict and it frees them from isolation.
Right.
While they're actually abiding in this appreciation, this is what can't help but happen right now, right here as I am.
Mm-hmm.
The more, when they build a lifestyle around this, maintaining this appreciation so that this appreciation becomes lived,
Yeah.
it takes the form of a way of living. This transforms the quality of their mind. So what occurs is that what arises in them is a contemplative disposition. They become interested in being themselves.
Good.
And because they're interested in being themselves, they can engage in what Dayananda calls contemplation, in the sense that they can be with themselves and they can start to enjoy being with themselves as themselves. And
Right.
Swami Dayananda says it's extremely important for us. It's the supreme action, actually, to be able to abide and to appreciate what it means to be myself. And the whole direction of this is that when I'm being myself, I find I'm being alive, I'm aware, and I'm also, because there's no self-objectification, I'm not feeling good about myself or bad about myself. There's a sense of fullness because it's not limited by any self-descriptions. And in Vedanta, that's called Sat, Chit, Ananda. Sat means being, Chit means awareness, and Ananda means fullness. But the thing that I'll just end on here that Swami Dayananda said that was very interesting, I mentioned it last time, was this. He says, I never ever dismiss what he calls mithya, which is the appearance of things. Because where there is mithya, there is sat. So when he looked at reality, all he was seeing was the presence of reality. He didn't have this crazy spiritual notion that, this is more spiritual than that. That that the presence of God or the presence of reality is right here, right now as we are. And that when we appreciate this presence, we change as individuals.
Wonderful. Okay, great.
Okay, Hal?
Very good.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you. I look forward to speaking to you the next time.
Yep, that'll be good. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.